Have you ever wondered if evil can hide behind a kind smile? What if the most elegant person in the room was actually the most dangerous? Before diving into this mystery, have you subscribed to the channel? If not, take advantage now. It helps me continue bringing you stories like this, the ones you don't see in the news. Like, comment below what you've heard about the Black Widow case, and let's go discover what lies behind this deadly web. This is a story where nothing is as it seems. A millionaire family begins to die one by one under seemingly natural circumstances. And right at the center of it all, she, a sophisticated, silent, and perhaps lethal woman. Throughout this true investigation, you'll see how a cold, strategic mind can transform a home into an invisible battlefield. And most disturbingly, you can live with people like this without ever suspecting it. Prepare for a narrative with twists and turns that defy logic, emotional decisions that cost lives, and an investigator who had to pit his own instincts against the calculated coldness of a possible serial killer. But beware, this story isn't just about Evelyn Blackridge. It's about the Evelyns that can exist all around us, and within environments that pretend to be perfect. So stick with me until the end, because the latest revelations will not only change your thinking about this case, but perhaps even change your thinking about human nature. When I first stepped through the rusted gate of Blackridge Manor, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't the Hampshire weather, it was the charged atmosphere of this place. The vegetation grew as if trying to hide the house from the world. The twisted branches looked like hands trying to pull someone inside. I'd been to crime scenes all over Europe, but something about that house told me this case would be different. The mansion's Gothic facade, stained by time, hid secrets that went beyond what the eye could see. A mansion built in 1879, inherited for generations, where every wall seemed to have witnessed hushed discussions, family pacts, and perhaps silent crimes. I always say that some houses speak, and this one screamed, but subtly, like someone whispering secrets in the dark. It didn't take long for me to realize this investigation wouldn't just be about evidence, but about buried stories. In my line of work, I've learned that where there's too much luxury, there's usually deep-seated filth. The mansion had it all: a library with rare books, antique tapestries, paintings of ancestors with judgmental gazes, and yet there was an undeniable coldness. This wasn't a home, it was a theater. A stage set up to maintain appearances, while behind the scenes, something rotten unfolded. I knew I had to look beyond appearances. And it was precisely as I walked down that long hallway, where even my footsteps seemed to echo with guilt, that something caught my eye. A recent family portrait, with forced expressions and smiles that didn't belong there. Everyone dressed in black. Mourning photo? I thought, no, it was a celebration. And then came the question that never fails: who was really being honored there? Or rather, who should have been in that photo? Blackridge family heirs was like entering a minefield. Rehearsed smiles, cold greetings, and glances that seemed to weigh the value of every word. They weren't just rich, they were heirs to a dynasty. Their money came from heavy investments in the pharmaceutical industry and luxurious properties around the world. But what really caught my attention was the way each of them carried their inheritance, like a weapon or a curse. The family fortune was estimated at around 180 million pounds, enough to ensure comfort for generations. But with this kind of wealth comes a silent plague: greed. And it doesn't come out loud. It whispers, disguised as ambition, entitlement, and acquired rights. When I began to delve into the family conflicts, I understood that the mansion housed more than luxury. It harbored a cold war between siblings, stepchildren, and even distant cousins. Every meeting between them felt like a game of chess, where no one trusted anyone else and everyone had something to gain from the other's death. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, prestige, status. Evelyn the widow was right at the center of it all. With Charles's death, she inherited more power than many thought she should. And that bothered many. The question lingering was, would anyone be willing to kill for it? Or worse, more than one person. I often say that money doesn't change anyone. It only reveals what's always been hidden. And in the Blackridge case, Money exposed deep cracks, old betrayals, and resentments bred in silence. It was as if everyone there had forgotten that sooner or later, the tables will turn. And when the tables turn, those who play dirty usually pay dearly. But the curious thing is that the more I dug, the more I realized perhaps whoever was pulling the strings wasn't who everyone suspected. From the first moment I saw Evelyn Blackridge, I realized I wasn't dealing with an ordinary woman. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and even silently make everyone look. There was something about her that went beyond elegance. It was a cold control, a calm that was unsettling. She spoke little, but each word was carefully calculated, as if she knew exactly the effect she wanted to create. I'd encountered many beautiful faces in investigations, but few so dangerously fascinating. Evelyn was 42 years old, but she seemed to be aging. Her flawless skin, her penetrating gaze, her firm posture, everything about her suggested perfection. But too much perfection always makes me suspicious. It's like too much makeup at a crime scene. It hides more than it reveals. Speaking to household staff, I discovered that she avoided contact with most people except the butler. She spent hours locked in the reading room or the conservatory. Isolation like that, in this kind of situation, is never just a personal preference. There were rumors, of course. Some said she married for convenience. Others said she'd lost a great love in the past and never recovered. But what they all had in common was fear. No one spoke of Evelyn lightly, always cautiously, almost as if invoking her were dangerous. When I looked into her background, I found little information, which was strange in itself. A woman married to a millionaire for almost 15 years, and yet invisible in public records. This set off alarm bells inside me. The biggest trap in investigations like this is underestimating silence. Evelyn didn't need to justify herself or explain herself. She was the center of everything and knew it. But behind that serene smile and quiet voice, there was something that didn't add up. It wasn't just grief. It was calculation. And when a person overcalculates even their grief, they're usually hiding something much bigger. But the most intriguing piece was yet to come. And ironically, it began to fall into place when I reviewed the details of Charles Blackridge's death. The news of Charles Blackridge's death reached me curiously discreetly. An influential billionaire, owner of one of the largest fortunes in the country, dies suddenly in his library. Silence? There were no scandalous headlines, no immediate investigations. Officially, a massive heart attack. But something wasn't adding up. Libraries aren't usually random locations for heart attacks, especially if the victim was, until then, healthy and disciplined with their medical routine. When I reviewed the autopsy report, I found the first hole in this story: abnormal levels of digoxin in Charles's blood. A heart medication, yes, but lethal in overdose. The detail? He wasn't even taking it regularly. Who would have access to the medication? And even more so, who knew how to manipulate the dosage? The obvious answer would be some employee or caregiver, but that was the easy way out. And in my work, the easy way out is usually a trap. Reviewing Charles's last days, I noticed he'd been complaining of dizziness, fatigue, and blurred vision. But doctors, based on normal exam results, attributed it to stress. Interestingly enough, Evelyn was the one who convinced him not to see a specialist out of town. Her justification was that he needed rest and avoid agitation. Like a doting wife. Or like someone with other plans. Sometimes danger comes not with shouting, but with excessive care, hot tea, and whispered words. The death scene itself screamed for attention. Charles was found slumped beside his armchair, with an open book on his lap and a half-empty cup of tea, his favorite beverage always prepared by Evelyn. Small details that no one noticed, but which for me began to form a pattern. Because when death arrives too silently, it's a sign that someone made a point of silencing it before it could speak. And it was in this silence that I began to hear the next victims. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that chance rarely acts with such precision. A few weeks after Charles's death, I received a strange report. His eldest son, Gregory, 38, had died during a weekend trip. The official cause? Pulmonary embolism. So far, so plausible. But then came the second report. Martha, the middle daughter, 35, had suffered a fatal domestic accident. She slipped on the stairs. 2 tragic deaths in the same family in less than 2 months? I began to sense a pattern. Both bodies had something in common. They had been under Evelyn's indirect care days before their deaths. In Martha's case, the staircase had a newly loosened step, a strange detail for a mansion where everything was meticulously maintained. Gregory, according to close friends, had undergone a forced detox after too much wine under her supervision. The coroner dismissed it all as coincidence, but coincidence is a word that makes me itch. It often hides something dirty behind a clean facade. It was as if death were strolling through the Blackridge house, but at an appointed time. No one screamed. No one suspected. The mood, in fact, was one of resignation, as if this were normal, part of a family curse. And that's when I noticed a disturbing detail. All the victims were in some way connected to the direct line of inheritance. The original will provided for an equal division among the children, with only a symbolic share for Evelyn. But with all of them dead, guess who became the primary beneficiary? While some colleagues said I was seeing too much, I said they were seeing too little. Investigations like this don't require immediate evidence, they require a pattern, and the pattern was unfolding before my eyes: silent deaths, victims near the top of the inheritance, an absence of overt physical violence, and a single constant presence in every scene: Evelyn. But there was one detail that still eluded me, something I would only understand when I met the man who unexpectedly called me into this case. I received the phone call on a cloudy Tuesday. One of those days when even the coffee seemed stronger than usual. On the other end of the line, a male voice, charged with urgency and contained fear. It was George, the Blackridge family butler. He didn't use direct words, but his message was clear. Something is very wrong here, Mr. Spencer. I confess I hesitated at first. It wasn't the first call from a wealthy mansion with well-buried secrets. But there was something in his tone that I couldn't ignore. George wasn't the kind of man to play it cool. 40 years of loyal service to his family, known for his discretion and sense of duty. If he sought me out, it was because he saw what no one else had the courage to admit. And when men like him speak, it's worth listening carefully. I scheduled the meeting for the next day. He asked me to be discreet, without official police involvement, at least for now. If she finds out you're coming, it could all be over before it begins. That echoed in my head. I arrived at the mansion without my badge on display. George welcomed me as if I were an old family friend. The show was necessary. Evelyn was home. We talked in the greenhouse, away from prying eyes. He told me about the deaths, the patterns, the whispers in the hallways, and the strange orders coming from above. The scariest thing? He didn't ask me to prove anything. He just wanted someone to open their eyes. They're not dying by accident, Mr. Spencer. They're being erased, one by one. I left with my mind racing. I'd dealt with strange cases before, with cold-blooded criminals, but this was the first time a crime had seemed so well choreographed, as if every step had been rehearsed years before. It was as if death were just another chess move in a masterstroke. And I knew, if I wanted to achieve checkmate, I would have to start by listening to the voices that don't shout, the ones that whisper truths in the silence, like the employees I saw walking down the hallways with their heads down. The longer I spent at Blackridge Mansion, the clearer it became that the silence of that place wasn't empty, it was inhabited. Throughout the hallways, I felt a constant sense of something following me with its eyes, even when no one was there. The servants avoided direct contact, and when they spoke, it was always in hushed tones, as if the air itself were listening. It was like walking through an open-air confessional, where each room hid a memory or a warning. I gradually discovered a sort of internal code among the staff. Exchanging glances, incomplete sentences, doors that closed too quickly. One of the gardeners, in a moment of carelessness, let slip that some nights he would wake to noises coming from the east wing, the very part of the house where Evelyn spent much of her time alone. When I investigated, I found signs of recent movement, light footprints on the dusty floor and an unlocked window overlooking the woods. I was also struck by the growing number of missing items. Watches, rings, even documents. Nothing of extreme value, but enough to shake the residents' sense of security. And then came the most curious detail. Switched medicine bottles. A caregiver told me, under stress, that he once found the wrong pills in Mrs. Martha's bottle, but was discouraged from reporting the incident. "She knows everything, Mr. Spencer," he said, looking over his shoulder, "and she makes us look like the crazy ones." This type of manipulation where the victim is led to doubt their own sanity is common in sophisticated emotional crimes. But here, it was being used on a large scale as a mechanism of collective control. Evelyn didn't use screams or threats. She used doubt, guilt, and fear. The entire house seemed to conspire in her favor. And in this charged environment, where reality distorted between what was seen and what was heard, I realized the next step would be to understand how she had placed herself at the center of it all legally. It was on a rainy night, the kind when even the paintings seemed to observe in silence, that Charles Blackridge's will was finally read. The entire family gathered in the mansion's main room, a scene more reminiscent of a courtroom than a moment of mourning. I was present as an observer, invited by the family lawyer, who, it must be said, also seemed uncomfortable with the content he was about to reveal. The heavy curtains muffled the sound of the rain outside, but nothing could muffle the impact of the words to come. The document read was recent, dated just 3 months before Charles's death. In it, to everyone's astonishment, Evelyn was named as sole heir, not only to the fortune, but also to his properties, artwork, vehicles, business interests, and surprisingly, even Charles's personal safe. His children, the few still alive, were stunned. All their previous rights had been revoked, without further explanation. The silence that followed was as cutting as any accusation. No one dared speak, but every look said the same thing. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's calculated expressions. She didn't even blink when the lawyer read the most impactful passages. No tears, no hesitation, just a slight nod, as if she already knew what was coming. One of Charles's nephews even tried to verbally object right then and there, but was politely, or not so politely, interrupted by Evelyn. Charles knew what he was doing. You should respect that. Cold, cruel, convincing. For me, reading that will was the trigger. The line between coincidence and intention had been firmly crossed. And worse, it had been done legally, with Charles's signature, witnesses, and seals. But then my greatest ally in cases like this came into play, doubt. Because it's one thing to sign a document, it's quite another to understand why someone would completely change their wishes at the end of their life. Especially when there's someone by their side with experience, motive, and, as I would begin to discover, a past much darker than they imagined. Wealthy families are like companies, big on the outside, political on the inside, and the Blackridges were no exception. A few discreet conversations with former employees were enough for me to understand that the relationship between Evelyn and Charles's children was anything but healthy. She never tried to integrate into the family dynamic. On the contrary, she seemed to cultivate a certain distance, elegant, yes, but sharp as a razor. And the children? Well, they never hid the fact that they considered her an intruder, a woman who arrived quietly and in a short time became the lady of the castle. Gregory, the eldest, was the most vocal about his distrust. In messages recovered from his cell phone, I read phrases that would alert any investigator, "She's poisoning Dad against us. Evelyn is planning something," and the most direct, "If I turn up dead, it wasn't an accident." Phrases like these don't just come out of nowhere. They stem from toxic relationships, constant manipulation, and small psychological abuses that accumulate like poison drops. And in this case, perhaps the poison wasn't just a metaphor. The curious thing is that Evelyn always presented herself as the family peacemaker. But all it took was a quick peek into each child's memories to find tense episodes. Visitation bans, changes to the father's medication schedule, Meetings canceled without explanation. She gradually isolated Charles under the guise of protecting him. This reminded me of another case I investigated in Prague years ago, in which the caregiver of an elderly millionaire did exactly that, cutting ties to maintain emotional and financial control over the victim. But the most disturbing thing was discovering that the children had initiated a silent legal process to challenge the validity of the new will. They never reached a conclusion because they died beforehand. And here, my dear reader, is where the puzzle begins to reveal its darkest pieces. Because when someone has the power to silence all forms of resistance, who's left to shout? Every investigation reaches a point where what seems too absurd to be true turns out to be exactly the truth. With Evelyn, that moment came when I decided to dig deeper into her past. I used my contacts in international civil registries, and what emerged was, to say the least, alarming. Evelyn had been married before twice, and in both cases her husbands had died suddenly, with causes as convenient as they were vague. One fell down a ladder, the other a heart attack in his sleep. Familiar, right? These records were buried under different names. Evelyn used variations of her given name, Eva Linhart, alternating surnames and cities. Even stranger, the marriages lasted less than 3 years each, long enough for her to be included in the will, inherit a sizable portion, and then disappear soon after. It was like following a trail of ghosts, where each turn revealed a new absence. And this kind of pattern doesn't happen by chance. It's meticulously engineered by those who know how to manipulate with patience. At this point, it was no longer about proving she had motives to kill. It was about understanding how she made it seem natural. Evelyn didn't leave ordinary trails. She didn't use weapons. She didn't create scandals. She didn't contradict herself. She operated with subtlety, with the blind trust she inspired in her husbands, with the image of a refined, cultured, absolutely harmless woman. And this was the most brilliant move of all, using her own femininity and the stereotype of fragility as a shield, a true expert in emotional engineering. As I connected the dots, I realized Evelyn wasn't just a morbidly lucky woman. She was a pattern, a formula, a serial widow with a track record clean enough to be invisible and lethal. And worse, there was more. Because the deeper I dug, the closer I got to a secret hidden within the walls of the mansion itself. A forgotten record, locked away, poised to change the game. It was on a frosty morning, while fog still licked the stained glass windows of Blackridge Mansion, that I found what changed everything. An old cabinet in the attic, locked, without a key. George, the butler, hesitated to tell me about it. He said it belonged to Martha, the middle daughter, who had recently passed away. With some insistence and a good pocket knife, I opened the corroded lock. Inside, among childhood albums and yellowed letters, lay a brown-bound notebook. Untitled, unadorned, just a faded elastic band holding its pages together. Martha's diary. I began reading carefully, and soon realized these were no ordinary notes. They were systematic records. Dates, times, medication names, symptoms, conversations. Martha was investigating her own family. She suspected Evelyn was mixing up her father Charles's medications. Worse, she claimed to have seen her stepmother handling capsules with rubber gloves in the conservatory. What's more, she reported sudden changes in her siblings' behavior, always after Evelyn's caregiving visits. What struck me most? The coldness with which Martha recounted everything. There were deeply personal passages. On one page she wrote, "If I die, know it was no accident. Evelyn knows. Evelyn watches." Those words stuck in my mind like nails in old wood. It wasn't just paranoia, it was real underlying, constant fear. And that fear drove Martha to leave clues even without knowing if anyone would ever find them. This wasn't just a diary, it was a time capsule, a confession written from the battlefield by someone who knew she might not make it out alive. With that notebook in hand, I had no doubts. Evelyn wasn't just a suspect, she was the center of the web. But the diary, as revealing as it was, still needed to be validated. It needed physical proof. And that's when I began revisiting every forgotten corner of the mansion, every seldom used room, every door no one opened anymore. Because if Martha was right and everything indicated she was, then Evelyn had something to hide, something far more concrete than words. Few people know, but in investigations like this, you have to be able to hear even the whispers of the walls. That's how I discovered the deactivated wing of the mansion, a forgotten corridor, locked with a lock as old as it was suspicious. George told me that part had been cordoned off after a renovation that was never completed. But there was something in the air, a chemical smell, subtle but present. You know that instinct that develops after years of dealing with lies? It pulled me in the right direction, and this time, it led me to a door hidden beneath a dusty tapestry. Behind her was a small, stuffy, dimly lit room. In the center, a work table filled with test tubes, hand-labeled vials, syringes, and even disposable gloves. Beside it, old books on botany, pharmacology, and toxicology. It was a makeshift laboratory, but meticulously set up. There was even a portable greenhouse with poisonous plants grown in small pots. Evelyn apparently had the technical know-how and the time to spare. She was creating low-dose poisons, enough to alter someone's health without arousing immediate suspicion. It was genius and terrifying. I photographed everything, documented every bottle, every label. There were substances like belladonna, oleander, and even concentrated extracts of pure digitalis. And among the papers, I found something that made me freeze: a timeline, dates, names, and what appeared to be dosage variations. They were all there. Charles, Gregory, Martha, even Diana, the elderly aunt. That laboratory wasn't just a shadowy pastime, it was a center of slow execution. Evelyn didn't kill in haste. She preferred to watch life slowly fade away, controlling each stage of the agony. I returned to my room that night without a wink of sleep. The mansion, once so strange, now felt alive, as if the very environment conspired to protect its greatest secret. But I already knew too much to stop. And the strangest thing, I hadn't yet confronted Evelyn directly. The game was being played in a crooked fashion, but with each piece I moved, it became clear she not only knew I was close, but had probably already started playing me too. George was more than a butler. He was the silent guardian of that mansion, someone who had seen generations pass, marriages crumble, heirs lost, and now, deaths mounting. I knew that sooner or later I would have to tighten that bond, and it was on a gray afternoon, as the rain streaked the windows as if trying to write warnings on the glass, that he finally relented. Sitting across from me, his eyes brimming with tears, he uttered the words that kept me awake for days. I saw it with my own eyes. What did he see? Evelyn, wearing gloves, handling Charles's medications. She changed the bottles when no one was around. She said it was to avoid stressing him with strong medications. But George knew something was wrong. He even confronted her once, discreetly, like someone testing the temperature of water. Evelyn didn't respond with anger. She responded with a smile, cold, empty, lethal. You're tired, George. Maybe you need a vacation. A month later, he had a minor accident on the stairs. Coincidence? He also recounted bizarre episodes, bottles that appeared and disappeared, expired medications in new packaging, changes to the routine that only Evelyn authorized. But the most powerful came later. George found a note, possibly written by Martha, hidden inside a book in the library. It read, "Trust Spencer. If anything happens to me, tell him everything." That was the trigger. The old butler, faithful for 4 decades, decided to break his silence. By then he knew that keeping secrets was a greater risk than revealing them. As he spoke, I realized Evelyn didn't operate alone. She needed a system around her silence, convenience, and fear. George was living proof that no matter how powerful a manipulator, there's always a loophole, someone who sees too much, someone who refuses to forget. And now that George had spoken, Evelyn's mask was slowly beginning to crack. But what came next would require more than courage. It would require facing the mastermind behind the plan and understanding its cold, disturbing logic. The psychology of crime has always fascinated me. There are patterns, archetypes, and hidden motivations that shape the behavior of killers like pieces of a perverse puzzle. When I realized who Evelyn really was, the phrase Black Widow came to mind with frightening clarity. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was a clinical profile. Women who become emotionally involved with men, often in positions of power or wealth, and who, with cold, methodical skill, eliminate these partners to reap the rewards, silently. I've studied dozens of similar cases throughout my career. The difference with Evelyn was her sophistication. She didn't kill on impulse. She built scenarios, cultivated trust, and wove emotional traps. Her weapon wasn't force, it was manipulation. She knew exactly when to appear vulnerable, when to show affection, and when to vanish into the shadows, leaving nearly invisible traces. With each kill, her position strengthened. And most disturbingly, it seemed like all of this was part of a script she had written years before. I spoke with a criminologist working with Scotland Yard. When I described the case, she simply shook her head. If that's what it sounds like, you're looking at one of the UK's most calculating killers. Evelyn didn't act out of anger, jealousy, or passion. She killed for control, to eliminate obstacles, to consolidate power, and she did it with the ease of choosing a wine for dinner. There was no hesitation. There was no guilt. There was only strategy. Cold, precise, elegant. And that's exactly what made the case so delicate. Because how do you arrest someone who's never been seen committing the crime, who has perfect alibis, a serene face, and an unblemished reputation among the rich and powerful? It was like trying to catch smoke with your hands. But I knew every predator, no matter how skilled, makes mistakes. And Evelyn, despite everything, was about to make a misstep, one I would only realize when yet another death shook the foundations of Blackridge House. Diana Blackridge was the last direct link in Charles's line. Her older sister, 76, was lucid, possessed of a firm presence and a sharp tongue. From the beginning of the investigation, Diana had been cooperative, albeit cautious. She was a woman who knew more than she was letting on. And unlike the other family members, she seemed unafraid of Evelyn, which automatically made her a potential threat. That's why when I heard the news of her death, something inside me exploded like a siren. According to the initial report, Diana was found drowned in her suite's bathtub, her head submerged in the still warm water. The scene seemed accidental, of course, elderly, slipping, disorientation. Everything pointed to a domestic tragedy. But something didn't add up. Diana was meticulous about her habits. She never bathed without first asking the housekeeper to stay nearby. And that night, curiously, she had dismissed the housekeeper, or rather, had someone dismissed her for her. The doubt fueled my mind. I ordered toxicology tests before the coroner could even take a deep breath. The result? High concentrations of benzodiazepines, a powerful sedative. Enough to knock someone out in minutes. When I asked Evelyn about the last person to see Diana alive, she replied with the same blasé air as always, I visited her to bring her tea. I was very shaken by the recent deaths. Yes, the same tea that appeared in the scenes of Charles, Martha, and now Diana. Coincidence? Or signature? It was this death that turned the tide for me. Diana had begun to raise questions about the wills, the management of the fortune, and according to a letter found later, was considering gathering the press to denounce the strange events in the family. Evelyn knew this, and Evelyn knew how to act quickly. Only this time she left a trail. Small, subtle, but enough to give me the chance I needed. Because what came next, my dear reader, would be the riskiest move of this entire investigation. Experienced fugitives don't flee in desperation. They escape silently. Evelyn, like everything she did, planned every detail with precision. I discovered her escape attempt by chance, thanks to an automatic airport security alert linked to Diana's name. A ticket purchased to Geneva, with a connection in Amsterdam, issued in the name of Elena Black. Same last name, similar name, a subtle detail, but one that gave everything away. And most impressive, the trip was scheduled for the day after Diana's funeral, as if she knew there would be no more obstacles after that burial. Heathrow Airport police without fanfare. I asked them to maintain complete discretion. We couldn't risk alerting her prematurely. I went there myself. Yes, I could have delegated the matter, but cases like this are personal. The wait was tense. Evelyn arrived alone, with a small set of elegant suitcases, wearing sunglasses and a scarf around her neck. She looked like a character from a film noir. Calmly, she handed over her fake passport at the counter. When the officers approached, she simply smiled. No surprise, no panic, as if she'd already expected it. Calmly spoken sentence provoked me more than any confession. She didn't see herself as a prisoner. She saw herself as the protagonist of a script she had written herself. Evelyn didn't struggle, didn't deny, didn't scream. She simply watched it all like someone contemplating the end of a play, proud of her own performance. But there, in her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't in control. The arrest was just the beginning. The evidence gathering, the statements, the reports, everything needed to be meticulously aligned to support the accusation. But at that moment, the most important thing had already happened. Her illusion of untouchability had been shattered, and even though the case was far from over, that capture gave me a rare certainty in my work. The truth, no matter how slowly it moves, always finds a way to arrive. And Evelyn, even handcuffed, still had much to reveal, especially in court. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Lawyers, journalists, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to get a closer look at the woman the tabloid was already calling the Black Widow of Hampshire. Evelyn entered the room with the same elegant bearing as always. She wore black, of course. No heavy makeup, no tears, just an erect posture and an expression of formality. To the audience, she was a mix of urban legend and living tragedy. But to me, who had already seen what she was capable of, it was just another carefully staged scene. The prosecution started off strong. They presented the connections between the deaths, Martha's diary, the vials found in the clandestine laboratory, the bank statements showing suspicious transfers, toxicology reports, and the interrogation recordings. But Evelyn, she didn't tremble. She just watched. Her defense argued that it was all coincidence, selective persecution, mass hysteria. Her lawyer even insinuated that I was obsessed with the case. I smiled, because obsession, in this case, was synonymous with justice. The witnesses emerged one by one. George, the butler, was the most decisive. His poise, sincere tone, and meticulous detail gave the jury what no paper could: emotional credibility. But the most striking moment of the trial was when I showed the timeline of deaths, synchronized with changes in the will and alterations in medication dosages. A simple graph, but it made the pattern leap out at you. It was like drawing the shadow of death with a ruler and compass. Evelyn remained impassive until the end. But when the verdict was read, guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, I noticed a micro-expression on her face. Something between contempt, relief, as if the play had finally ended and she could exit the stage with dignity. Deep down, perhaps Evelyn never believed she would be caught. Or perhaps deep down, she even wanted to be discovered. Because even the most calculating monsters eventually tire of their own labyrinth. But the scariest part was yet to come. What we discovered after the trial, when we thought everything had already been revealed. The moment the verdict is read is always an emotional crossroads. For those investigating, it's the weight of responsibility. For those judging, it's the burden of justice. And for those being judged, it's the end of the mask. When the judge read guilty, Evelyn didn't even blink. Her expression was one of someone who already knew the script. There were no screams, no tears. She simply turned her face toward the jury and did something that still gives me chills to remember. She smiled. A small, restrained smile, as if to say, "You took too long." The sentence came down hard, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The prosecution had managed to tie together all the dots with surgical precision. The reports, the records, the testimonies, everything formed a logical chain that was difficult to dismantle. Still, there was a sense of unease in the air. Evelyn's eyes, as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, said the game wasn't over, as if there were pieces on the board no one else had seen. And when a mind like hers operates in silence, it's good to be alert. In the days following the trial, the press immersed itself in the case. Headlines, documentaries, interviews. Evelyn had become a dark symbol, a reminder that evil sometimes dresses in silk and speaks sweet. But amidst all the writing, no one seemed to notice the most disturbing detail. She never truly tried to defend herself. She never panicked. She never pleaded for innocence, which leads me to believe that deep down she had already accepted her fate, perhaps as part of the plan or as punishment. And yet, even with the verdict, even with the world aware of who she was, I felt the case wasn't over. Because in every story where the criminal mind is more dangerous than the weapon itself, there's always one last play, an unopened safe, a buried secret, a letter that never reached its recipient. And it was in a forgotten corner of Blackridge Mansion that this hunch was confirmed, revealing something that could change everything we thought we knew about Evelyn. You think it's over when the verdict comes in? That everything has been resolved, that the ghosts have been buried along with the victims. But the truth is, in some cases, the trial is just the end of one story and the opening paragraph of another. Weeks after Evelyn's arrest, I received an unexpected call. George, the butler, had found a key hidden inside one of the garden statuettes. A small key with the initials E.B., Evelyn Blackridge. And the most curious thing, no one knew what it opened. It was with this key that we found a hidden door behind the library bookshelf. It wasn't a secret passage, it was a room. Small, windowless, with cork-paneled walls and a built-in safe. Inside were dozens of documents, birth certificates, contracts, international bank records, all in different names. Evelyn, it seemed, had maintained multiple identities for over 20 years. There were even Brazilian, Swiss, and Argentine passports, and a photo of her with another younger man. No name, no date. This opened a new line of investigation. Was Charles Blackridge really the last, or had Evelyn already acted in other countries under other names with other victims? None of the documents contained a direct confession, but they all pointed to a parallel life that no one suspected. And even more disturbing, the presence of an active account in Zurich, with recent transactions made by a prosecutor who was never located. Evelyn had been arrested, yes, but someone out there might still be playing for her. At this point, I was no longer seeking justice. I was seeking meaning, because the Evelyn case, Blackridge, wasn't just about death. It was about manipulation at a structural level, about how someone can create versions of themselves, layer upon layer, until they become a living legend. But legends, no matter how solid they seem, always have cracks. And finding this final clue, I realized her story might not have begun with Charles, and it definitely hadn't ended with me. There was still one final piece to move, and it was about to be moved. Some investigations transform you, not because of the complexity of the crime, but because of the depth of the human being behind it. Evelyn Blackridge taught me a lesson no criminology textbook could. True danger doesn't scream, it whispers. It moves between calculated gestures, sweet words, and a flawless image. She didn't kill on impulse, nor out of hatred. She killed because she believed, deep down, that she would never be caught. That the world was a board game, and she was the only player with spare pieces. During my years as an investigator, I saw it all. Brutal killers, unstable psychopaths, even monsters with innocent faces. But Evelyn struck me differently. because she didn't seem like a monster. She seemed like an idea. The idea that with charm, intelligence, and coldness, it's possible to manipulate even reality. And how many of us have lived with people like that? People who drain your energy, who mold facts to their own narrative, who transform doubts into convenient truths, all with a smile on their faces. If there's one thing this case left me with, besides reports and evidence, it was a wake-up call. Pay attention to silent intentions. In the colleague who never commits, the partner who always plays the victim, the family member who manipulates for affection. Sometimes the real predators aren't in the jungle, they're in the next room, disguised as counselors, caregivers, protectors. Evelyn represented all of these. And that's why, even in prison, she lives on in the memories of those who knew her. Not as a murderer, but as an uncomfortable mirror of human manipulation. I often say that some people kill out of desperation, others out of passion. But there's a rarer and more dangerous type, those who kill for control. Evelyn was that type. And if there's one thing you should take away from this story, it's this. Learn to recognize real-life Evelyns, because they don't appear suddenly. They build themselves slowly, like an invisible web. And before you know it, you might already be trapped. Now tell me, how many Evelyns have you let slip by unnoticed in your life? People who manipulate you with elegance, who smile while weakening you, who convince you everything's fine, when in reality they're tearing you apart from the inside. Cases like this aren't just meant to shock. They serve as a warning, because true evil often doesn't come screaming out, it acts silently, planning every move. So what will you do with this knowledge? Will you ignore it? Will you ignore the patterns, or will you start paying closer attention to the details most people prefer to overlook? Tell me in the comments what impacted you most about this story. Do you think Evelyn was born this way? Or was she shaped by circumstances we can't even imagine? If this content resonated with you, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell, because here, with each new investigation, we don't just uncover crimes, we uncover truths that can change the way you see the world around you.